So, I want to talk a little bit today about one of the most controversial parts of the lead up to World War II. And it is a concept known as appeasement. And I'll explain to you what appeasement is. But basically, our two main players today are going to be the man on the right, who is, of course, Adolf Hitler. Adolf Hitler, the time period we're talking about, really 1937 and 38. Is the Chancellor of Germany. So he has an elected position as what today we would think of as kind of being like our president, our chief executive of the country. The man he's shaking hands with there on the far left is Neville Chamberlain. And Neville Chamberlain is the Prime Minister of Great Britain at the start of World War II. Because the United States is being isolationist, they're not really involved in international politics. The growing threat of Germany is being addressed by the British. And so the Prime Minister is the person who's in charge of their government. And so that's who's going to be dealing with Hitler. But let me try and put this in a way that, that you can maybe understand a little bit. So let's say that you are in a relationship, that you have got a boy or a girl that really likes you and who you really like. And when things get started in the relationship, everything is going great. The physical attraction is there. You are compatible in your interest. You enjoy doing things together. And so you've got really everything that you ever wanted. So then this other person, this significant other, comes up to you and says, hey, you know, everything's going great. I really like where this relationship's going. But you've got this friend, right? Maybe it's a friend of the opposite sex who is a little too close for your significant other's comfort. That maybe it is this person, they're a little jealous. They're willing to admit it, and they say, you know what, just love how the relationship's going, but I'm a little upset that you're so close to so-and-so, and that you are friends with them, but those are things that really should be between us, and I'm going to need you to stop seeing that person. Well, you've been friends with this other person for a long time. Maybe you don't even want to end that relationship, but you look and are like, you know what? This other person's really pretty, or I don't know if I could get somebody as good as this other person. So you go to that friend and you say, look, we're not going to be able to be as good of friends anymore. That friend obviously is hurt, but you assume, hey, they'll get over it. What you've done is you've appeased your significant other, right? So you have given them something they wanted in order to kind of keep the peace between the two of you. Now, let's say a couple of weeks later, that significant other comes to you and then says, hey, you know, I really appreciate you kind of taking care of that relationship that was making me uncomfortable. What I was wondering was, would you care to not spend every Saturday night with your friends, right? Guys have this thing, Saturday nights for the boys, right? That's a weekend night. I really don't want to be alone on a weekend night. I think since we're together, you have to spend it with me. Is that something you're okay with? You enjoy your Saturday night with the boys. You don't want to give that up. But again, you look at your boys, you look at your girl, and she's way prettier than they are. And so you say, all right, if I have to cut on my friends, I'll do that just for you. And what you've done is you've appeased that person again. You've given them something to keep the peace. The problem with appeasement is what happens when they ask for something you're not willing to give. that's when things fall apart. So let's say this person comes up to you again and says, hey, I really appreciate all the changes you've made. I'm sorry, I'm kind of a jealous person. All I need you to do now is give me the code to your cell phone. And I'm going to need to look in that every day and just make sure nobody's calling you or texting you inappropriately. I just really need this to trust you. And you're like, well, wait a minute, right? That's just too much, right? I'm already not hanging out with my friends. I've already cut on my other really good friend. No, it's just too much. And then usually what happens is what started off as a beautiful friendship turns into something like this, right? There's going to be a fight that ends it. Basically, all you're doing with appeasement is you're pushing the fight down the road. And a lot of times when you do that, the fight turns out to be worse than what it would have been in the beginning. And believe it or not, that little parable about relationships is a pretty good parable about the start of World War II. We talked a lot about the end of World War I and how the end of World War I is going to lead directly into World War II, how Hitler uses some of those ideas in Mein Kampf and in his rise to power to tap in to kind of the psyche of the German people who feel like that they have been overrun by the Treaty of Versailles. What we're going to see is Hitler taking steps to roll back the Treaty of Versailles. And the first time that he does this, like one of the things they do is they start to build their military up again. That's a violation of the Versailles Treaty. If France and Britain, now the United States didn't obviously sign off, we talked about that, but the United States, if these countries had come together and said, no, you can't do this, this is a violation of the treaty, Germany would have had to pay attention. They wouldn't have been strong enough to stand against those other countries. But what's going to happen is France and Britain and those countries are so committed to the idea of not having another war that they're going to look the other way. They're going to say, okay, well, you can do that, right? But don't do anything else. But then the next thing comes along, right? Like there's a little bit of map work that we'll look at in a second, right? Where Germany starts to expand. They say, okay, well, you can have that, but you can't have anything else. Until eventually something's going to happen to where folks are like, no, wait a minute, you really need to stop. But by the time they get to that point, it's too late. One of the first areas that is in conflict is what's called the Rhinelands. And I've got a map here for you. It's on the border between Germany, Belgium, and France. And the Rhine River was kind of a natural border to Germany. It's the border leading up to World War II. Germany wanted to expand. At different times historically, that had been part of Germany. Kind of Hitler's rationale was there are people of German descent who are still living there. So as they start to move into that, again, all the rest of the world would have had to do. So that's a disputed piece of land. The next thing Hitler's going to do is he's going to annex the country of Austria. Now, you remember we had that Austro-Hungarian Empire that has shrunk after World War I. Hitler himself was from Austria. It's kind of bringing the family back home. If you've ever seen the movie The Sound of Music, right? This is kind of what's going on at the end of The Sound of Music. Now, he doesn't have to militarily take over Austria. There are videos I'll put up for you on the YouTube playlist of the Austrian government taking off the blocks at the border in order to just let the Nazis roll right in. But again, any kind of expansion like this should have triggered those folks who had signed on to the Versailles Treaty to say, no, you can't do this, right? This is against what's happened. The next thing he's going to do is he's going to target Czechoslovakia. Now, he's not going to target all of Czechoslovakia. If you look where Czechoslovakia meets Germany, there's kind of a C-shaped area of land there, and the argument Hitler's going to make is these are German heritage people. They want to be part of Germany. So we would like to take over just that part of Czechoslovakia, not the whole country. Now, Czechoslovakia is one of those countries that had been built after World War I. And when Britain and France allowed this to happen, It's almost like they're being abandoned, right, by these folks who are supposed to be their allies. So it's rough on the people of Czechoslovakia. Now, the rub is going to come after that, right? So Czechoslovakia, um, the guy that you saw earlier from England, right, the prime minister, is going to head over to talk to Hitler. And as he talks to Hitler, he basically looks and says, hey, we don't want you doing this anymore. And Hitler says, hey, I've got everything I wanted, and I've got everything I want. I'll even sign a pact with you. And so the two of them will sign the Munich Pact. In the Munich Pact, the prime minister will come back, will wave this piece of paper as he lands back in England. And he says, hey, I've got this piece of paper. Hitler and I have both signed it. And what it says is that our two people are never going to go to war again. Well, the problem is Hitler knows he's going to go back on that pact. And England and Neville Chamberlain, the prime minister, have both kind of put their heads in the sand. They really don't want another world war. And so they will put their last hopes really in this pact. But Hitler the whole time has got his eyes on one more piece of land. Got it circled there for you on the screen. It's Poland. Poland's another one of those countries created after World War I. And Hitler wants to take Poland. Problem is, on the other side of Poland is the Soviet Union. And he knows that if he moves aggressively towards the Soviet Union, that the guy in charge, a guy named Joseph Stalin, is not going to be nearly as easy to appease as Neville Chamberlain has been on the West. And so he works out a deal. He actually sends envoys over to the Soviet Union and says, what if we split it? What if we end up, you take the eastern part of Poland, we'll take the western part, and then we'll sign a pact between the two of us that we aren't going to fight each other. Again, Hitler knows this pact isn't even as good as the paper it's printed on, but if he can convince people, at least until it's too late, that he doesn't have any kind of hostile intentions, then he's going to be able to get what he wants. So they're going to sign the Nazi-Soviet Non-Aggression Pact. These are two peoples who did not trust each other. Joseph Stalin is not a nice guy. We're going to talk about that when we get to World War II. The only reason that we work with him is kind of that principle of the enemy is my friend. We don't have a lot in common. These two guys don't have a lot in common. The communism of the Soviet Union butts up against the fascism that Hitler will eventually bring into Germany. Both of them are wanting to dominate the world. And so if you've got two people that close that want to dominate the world, obviously there's going to be conflict between the two. Eventually Hitler will double-cross Stalin after World War II has started, but it won't be for the first year. They signed this non-aggression pact. It was supposed to be for 10 years that these two wouldn't fight. And like I said, last a year or so is all that's going to be in effect. Well, the invasion of Poland, right, that small country there, is the line in the sand for Great Britain. When Hitler rolls into Poland on September 1st, 1939, England will declare war, and so will France on the country of Germany. And just like we saw with World War I, it doesn't take very long before the world is lining up in different sides. Now, what Hitler's done with that Nazi-Soviet pact is he's bought himself a little time not in that same situation that Germany was in at the beginning of World War I, right? Remember, they were having to fight on both the eastern and the western fronts. Here, he's only got to fight on the west for right now until he double-crosses Stalin. But that's the line in the sand. Well, here's the problem, right? England has spent years appeasing Hitler, right? Giving him what he wants in order to keep war from happening. Well, once they decide this line is too far, well, he's already built up his military. He's already taken some of this territory. He's very popular with a lot of his people. And so it's too late once they've decided that that's what they want to do. And so you'll still hear that word talked about a little bit today, this idea of appeasement, but that's how it's going to fit into the start of World War II.